and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It's 9/11, and what that means is 17 years ago today, every single one of us who are alive remembers exactly where we were, what we were doing, what happened. Almost every, in fact, for me, almost every moment of that day is etched in my mind. I was in Cleveland at the Cleveland Clinic. My grandmother was having knee replacement surgery. I remember taking her to the hospital early in the morning. We got there 7 a.m. I remember vividly. She was worried. It was one of these things. She was an older woman. Who knows? You might not get off the table. That was a huge concern. And the time that she was asleep, having this surgery, the time where she was in that surgery, the world changed. Completely and totally changed. And I remember thinking at the time, it's one of those moments that I remember vividly thinking that, in her lifetime, she had seen, World War II. She had lived through that. She had lived through Korea, Vietnam. She lived through all of this chaos and this turmoil, and now this. And I remember at first the bewilderment. Was this an accident? How could a pilot be so bad? I remember turning to my family who was with me and saying, "This is an attack. This is going to be bad." Not thinking that there would be another and potentially another. I remember at the time being very, very angry, and I also remember. And this is one of those things that, sticks in your mind vividly. Seeing a couple of doctors pointing at each other going, "Did you do this?" I remember this vividly. And very angry. And I remember, worrying that, the world is changing. My grandmother's in peril and surgery, and all of this, and how's the world going to wake up tomorrow? And I also remember driving after the surgery. I was there all day long. It was late at night, and I had driven from central Pennsylvania all the way to Cleveland on one tank of gas, and it was literally on fumes. And you can ask my wife. I do this all the time, and it's a horrible thing to do. Don't do it. Because your fuel pump just will hate you for it, but it's something that I've done. So I drove straight through on fumes coming back, and I had to stop for gas. And I remember gas being $8.50 a gallon, because all of the gas stations were just ready to gouge. And I remember going, man, this is going to be a very ugly period. And I remember entering my grandmother's house with this just kind of eerie feeling that the world was going to change. And that everything that we had taken for granted that morning when I woke up at 6:30 was about to change. And here we are in the post 9/11 world, and tons of things have changed. We have given up, massive amounts of civil liberties. We have allowed the consolidation of secretive government, things that, pre 9/11 we would have never tolerated. The kind of NSA, spying and all that stuff that goes on, we would have never allowed. The Patriot Act would have never happened. The consolidation of powers would have never happened. And yet in the aftermath, it's what we've allowed. And I remember right after 9/11 when the Patriot Act was, being debated or rammed through, however you want to frame that. I remember going to a League of Women Voters event. And they had a panel of, 3 people who were for it, 3 people who were against it. And interestingly enough, the people who had actually read each and every single page of it were the ones who were against it. The people who read the executive summary and the footnotes and the talking points, oddly enough, were those who had been in favor of it. And it came out in this discussion. And what was bizarre to me at the moment was how many people were willing to give away their freedoms and their liberties and their privacy for some bizarre sense of security, for some bizarre moment of safety. And I remember just going, we're moving in a very troubling direction. And I remember one woman who was all ready to, immediately, why can't we have a national ID card? Why can't we have, a national whatever, so that I don't have to be inconvenienced at the airport. And it's interesting to me, and it's one of these things, kind of in the post 9/11 world, how much we're willing to sell away our liberties and our rights and our freedoms for convenience, for fake safety or security. It's just one of those things. So on 9/11, I often remember, that day, and my mind won't allow me to go anywhere else. But I also like to, to look at other people's reactions. And today was an interesting day of watching conservatives give Donald Trump credit for something that he never did, which is donate a bunch of charity and a bunch of workers to the 9/11 cause. It never happened. But hey, conservatives, facts don't matter to you anyway. I spent the day watching as the conservatives attempted to smear Hillary Clinton even further about the Benghazi attack, which was a horrible, horrible tragedy. And not one of them will point the finger at the Republicans who fought for austerity and belt tightening and budget cuts that could have possibly put more resources into that embassy, to where maybe we would have had more people there. Just a thought, but that never came up. And understand that there were 7 investigations over a 2-year period, probably the most investigated thing that's ever happened in this country. Much more investigated than 9/11 ever was. More investigated than I would even argue even the Kennedy assassination was. And interestingly enough, as much digging as the Republicans did, they still couldn't come up with anything on her, although they have, I believe. And the I believe folks are still ready to crucify Hillary Clinton for the horrible tragedy that happened on September 11th, 2012. And it was a horrible tragedy. But to hear the conservatives go on and on about, how the Obama people, sat and watched from their comfort of security and all this is just angering and ludicrous. And I find, on a day like today where we should be unified and we should be coming together and remembering how the nation was attacked, have an opportunity to reach across whatever political divide, whatever ideological divide, whatever has torn us apart, and say, at least on this day, we should be able to honor the dead, honor the sacrifices of those folks who went to ground zero and gave their lives to try and find others. That's the least we can do, is to, on this day, not be horribly, horribly divisive. That didn't happen. And later on, we're going to talk with Sara Nelson, who was in Shanksville earlier today and took a picture of a guy with a T-shirt, Trump 2020, and underneath it said, F your feelings. That's what he wore to the memorial in Shanksville. And it's that kind of discourse, that kind of, I don't know what makes someone get up and go, you know, I'm going to go to a memorial service and I'm going to put this on. I don't know what goes between someone's ears. And as I tweeted out, I hope someone dropped him on his head when he was a kid, because maybe there's an excuse. Maybe we can give a justification. Maybe he was drop kicked. I don't know. But I don't know how you do that. So we got a lot to talk about today, a lot to get to. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where were you on 9/11? What do you remember about the day? And what do you hope for the future? I'd love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Sara Nelson's going to be here to share some of her thoughts about the airline pilots, the stewardesses, the people who were in the air that day, the people who were working that day, and her members who have served this country and have served us for a long time. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2001. We pause to remember those who died in the 9/11 attacks. Of those killed, nearly a quarter were union people. Hundreds of firefighters were lost, dozens of building tradespeople, and many other unions lost members as well, including the AFT, SEIU, Unite Here, CWA, and AFSCME. Those lost that day will remain firmly forever in our memories. What is less well known is the number of those first responders who are suffering from chronic and fatal diseases related to 9/11 or those who have already died. It is estimated that over 400,000 people were exposed to World Trade Center contaminants. These include more than 70 carcinogens and other hazardous substances. Of those exposed, over 91,000 were first responders. As of June 2017, over 67,000 first responders and over 12,000 survivors had registered in the World Trade Center Health Program run by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The program provides medical monitoring, health evaluations, and treatment for those who qualify. Of those registered responders still alive, more than 45,000 suffer from certified conditions as defined by the Zadroga Act of 2010. And for registered survivors, nearly 10,000 suffer from certified conditions. Close to 700 registered first responders have already died from certified conditions. However, this number is considered a low estimate given that there were many who died before the program was established. There are also a number of illnesses believed related to the attacks but not yet certified. If you are a survivor or were a 9/11 first responder and would like to enroll in the World Trade Center Health Program, please visit cdc.gov/WTC or call toll-free 1-888-982-4748.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united for undivided, we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters, and all you and I are win. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets align, ain't no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So that's the question on days like today. What were you doing? Where were you? What do you remember? And then how do you spend the day remembering those who lost their lives, those who, with great courage and great sacrifice, reached out for others? And look, I'm still in awe of those firemen and those policemen who ran into the burning building and sought to help others. I'm still, it's one of those things that you have to give respect and dignity and courage and all of those things too. And yet still on these days, you still have the kind of anger and division that you see. But today there were events in Washington, in New York, and here in Pennsylvania, in Shanksville, And one of the folks here in Pennsylvania, attending one of the events here in Pennsylvania, is Sara Nelson. She's the president of the Association of Flight Attendants-CWA. She represents 50,000 flight attendants and members at 20 airlines across the U.S. Sara, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's pretty meaningful to talk with you about this today.
Yeah, I mean, this is a rough day, I'm sure, especially for you and for your members, because this is you lost a number of folks and potentially could have lost more.
We could have lost a lot more. We lost 25 flight attendants on September 11th, but that just barely begins to tell the story of what we went through. I was a flight attendant based in Boston. I had flown Flight 175 just the week before. All 7 flight attendants I called good friends, who were the crew of Flight 175, in addition to the 2 customer service agents who were going on vacation together. And I had flown with the pilots as well. So this is home and personal for me, but flight attendants around the nation felt this. They knew exactly what it was like for those flight attendants, the few who were the first to die with having their throats slit to try to get other passengers to stop from rising up and acting back to gain access to the cockpit. They understood exactly what that must have been like to follow our training, to be told not to fight back, to be told to try to appease these terrorists, and then to be reporting some of the first intelligence of the day that allowed our country to finally respond when we had failed prior to that event because of all that had been done to lead up to 9/11. I'm reminded of that as well as I walk through the museum today. But, the flight attendants and the passengers on Flight 93 took that information, and as soon as Americans, as union members, as people with heart understood what was happening, in a moment's notice, they decided to band together, former strangers, and fought back. And it's the greatest act of heroism on U.S. soil, I would argue, Flight 93. But we have made a commitment as a union. We've been through so much since then. We had to get back on the airplanes and usher people home to their families. We had to come back. We had to grieve what we had lost. We had to grieve the fact that our careers had changed forever. We had to face this while we were also facing an immediate 20% cut to our workforce. So 20% of us were out of jobs. Our roommates, our classmates, our flying mates, our flying changed. Our jobs were in jeopardy. We had to rebuild that. We had to fight just to get extended unemployment benefits at the time. We had to fight to keep the airlines up in the air, to keep our economy going. We went through those bankruptcies, all of that. As I stood over those pools today, and I was in New York. I wasn't in Shanksville today. I had almost 100 members who were going to Shanksville today. But as I stood over those pools, and I stood with some other people who I've spent this time with, we are reminded of every single day since then, the names that are around that pool in New York that we vowed we would never forget. And that meant not only forgetting what they sacrificed and forgetting what happened that day, but fighting every single day to make sure that we learned from that we stood together, that we understood the importance of unity and the incredible lesson that they gave us on that. And I really was overcome with all that we have done through our union, because what happened immediately after 9/11 was that the company came to us in Boston. We were a junior base, small base. We lost 7 of our flying partners, 2 customer service agents that we called friends, that we would go out with, that we celebrated births with and birthdays. We knew these people inside and out, and we're grieving the loss of them. And they came the day after and said the company is hemorrhaging money. Everybody's got to chip in and get back to work for the company. And as we were grieving and trying to come to terms with what these representatives from the company were saying, in walks Senator Ted Kennedy. And all he said to that manager was, "You get out." And we sat in that room and talked about our friends and heard, and received incredible care from someone who could give care like maybe nobody else in this country. We sang patriotic songs, and he listened for hours to stories about our friends. And so all of that came back, but every day since that has meant something because of those lives that were lost, lives of people who were some of the best people we could imagine. We're thrilled there are angels today. So we go through all of this, and we've made the commitment every year to be there in uniform, to remind people that flight attendants and pilots were among the first to lose their lives that day, among the first to be first responders that day. And we go to the 3 national memorials, including Shanksville. And there was a group of almost 100 flight attendants and pilots today who had arranged with the Park Service ahead of time to be there. We go there every year. They were there an hour earlier than their scheduled arrival time, and they were denied entrance and kept there for 3 hours waiting and could not get in until the president left. And in the meantime, there were people there with these Trump T-shirts, like you said, that one of our honor guard members took a picture of that said, F your feelings. And we're being kind by just saying F, of course. I mean, it's the full word. It's right out there. Trump 2020, F your feelings. In Shanksville, at the Flight 93 Memorial, where crews are going there in an action of unity, in an action of respect, in honor of our heroes, one day where we pause, we put it all aside, and we remember what it meant for those people on that plane in an instant to bond together, people who didn't know each other at all, but understood a common bond of understanding that they can't let evil win, that they will fight for freedom, and they'll fight for all of our freedoms. That's what happened there. We went there to respect that, and that's what the crews experienced today, was an inability to go there and be a part of the service like we have been every year since. Being there when the bell is tolled at 10:03 when that flight hit the ground, and they had to wait several hours more before they could actually get to the memorial site, create their own memorial, which they did. Of course they did. They didn't turn around. But that's what happened today.
What's the justification for not allowing them in? I mean, I thought that was part of the ceremony. I mean, because, what's the justification?
The Park Service was extremely upset and trying to help us. And there were troopers who were saying that the bus that we were in was going to be too heavy and it might sink into the ground. And so they're keeping us back for our own safety. And there were all kinds of excuses. And the only thing that I do know is that there was an effort to control who was getting there. And all I can think is that this was an effort to make us believe that the show that happened there today was fully supported, that people were excited about, but again, the crowd was handpicked. And so you said something earlier about, where we are in this country and the divide and how absurd this was. And I do think it's really important for everyone to remember that we have been experiencing huge acts of theater. And our experience as union members, I mean, there were people who didn't speak to each other before 9/11. And on the days following that, I have a dear friend now who, we were political odds in our union. Of course, unions have lively and spirited debates.
Sure.
Political odds. And days after 9/11, as Boston started to open up again, Boston flight attendants were grieving. They didn't want to fly. There were other flight attendants who volunteered to come in and fly those flights. And we were bringing people and greeting those flights with groups and with American flags and singing patriotic songs and thanking those flight attendants for working those flights. And in an instant, this person who had been at political odds with me and we had disagreed on many issues, we saw each other, recognized each other, had never even had a conversation face to face, and hugged and stood there and cried for about 10 minutes. And both of us have been changed ever since. And, that's what today is about. And I think that that's really what the